If you have the ambition that you just want to be the biggest podcast in Sydney, that's different to someone who wants to be the biggest technology podcast in the world, right?
How do we base our strategy in scaling up
Yeah.
if we have a new thing every day?
Sometimes in a corporate world, the ambition is not there. After seeing it in media and marketing, TV, newspapers, we spotted what was going to happen to retail. Yeah.
Do you think the Australian government is doing enough to help businesses in Australia?
And so what starts to happen after the first year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, particularly in software is, and I think that's the number one thing that we get to too late when starting a business. $10,000 over here on YouTube advertising. How does that
YouTube
money...
will love you, no? when you talk to people about new ideas, they'll always push you back or just give you the risk.
And you ask the founder, who helped you? Who did you turn to when you needed to, when the moment was right? Who did you turn outward to? They'll say either up.
Claire, thank you so much for being here today. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast today. I'm sure your experience and whatever you've gained through the years, especially in the scaling up business and your expertise in this field, will be of a great value to our viewers. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. Look, I'm not sure where to start. I have a lot of topics and subjects I would like to discuss with you. Okay. But let's start from where everything started for Claire.
Yeah, so I had a pretty interesting upbringing in that we moved a lot. So we went to a lot of different places. We lived in a lot of different...
When you say we, who is we?
My family, so my parents and my two brothers. We moved around a lot. And part of that was because my dad was in academia, but he also stepped out of academia and worked in private life. And one of the things he is very passionate about is technology. So I think even to this day, in his late 70s, my dad is probably still the gadget man of the household.
Fantastic.
He gets all the newest phones and the newest AI tools and all that sort of stuff. It's amazing. But yeah, my parents were very influential on me in two ways. I think my mum was very influential in that she was the one that kind of really encouraged me to go out and get educated and to make sure that I had, put away a degree and I was on track with a career, which, as a woman was also very important. So she instilled in me this sense of making sure I was independent. I had my own career. I was financially independent. And before I had a family, or I had children. And so
So between your mom and your dad, who is your idol?
That was my
really?
Oh no, you can't.
You can't differentiate?
Yeah, no, different things, but both very influential. My father, as I said, was he was, I would say, a young innovator. He adopted new technologies like, he hoovered it up. And actually he was one of his early jobs was he was actually part of the training company that went around and taught, personal computing and word processing to government, people who worked in government departments.
So he was really an instructor.
No. So he was the managing director of a business that actually did that. But they put together training courses. And remember, when personal computing came in and started to become ubiquitous, like a computer on every home, right? This was Microsoft's vision and Bill Gates' vision. He was one of the big companies in Australia, or he worked for one of the big companies in Australia who was helping to do that for the government sector, so to train everyone. And so I think that was my first exposure to disruptive technology. And, we had in the home, we always had the latest computer and started with Atari and then moved on to different Compaq. And then, we always had the latest computer. Dad taught me from a very early age, and my brothers a little bit of coding and,
Oh my God. So you were born in the technology bubble.
Yeah, I guess I mean, to be honest, I'd never really thought of it that way until we talked and I started thinking, actually, what was my first encounter with technology? And it was actually pretty early on during family times. I'm not saying I'm a super early adopter myself of new technology. I would say I'm at the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge.
Okay.
But yeah, that definitely shaped me. So my parents have been very influential in those early days, as with all of us, childhood is very
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
So that gave you a huge motivation just to progress in your life, and you
Correct.
decided, I have to get a degree
Yes.
and be be a manager down one track, to be a successful woman.
had no
Like,
idea.
what did you have in mind?
I ended up going to, as I said, we moved a lot in life. And I think I went to 8 different schools across 3 different cities.
That's not bad. 8
Yeah,
different
that's
schools.
not bad. And then I had 3 universities on top of that. So I was quite familiar with moving around. And so it probably comes as no shock to you that I've actually also moved around a lot in my adult life, as we've discussed. But I think I did my first degree at UQ. It was a commerce degree. Didn't really know what I wanted to do at the end of it. In those days, you got accounting and you got accounting, and that was kind of it. So I kind of came out, went for the obvious thing and applied for the big accounting firms, to which I was told, Claire, you're not an accountant. Honestly,
Seriously, they told you that?
Yeah, the head of recruiting I went through all the different rounds of interviews and testing, and it came down to me and one other person who I knew from my own degree that I had studied, a friend of mine. And he looked me in the eye. He said, "You're not an accountant, Claire. Accountants are boring." That's what he said to me. The recruiter I couldn't believe it. So anyway, I didn't take that, and I ended up going on an internship in Manila.
So did it put you down, or just give you a motivation just to work on yourself and improve?
I think honestly, I'm very young. I was 21 or something, and I think he could see what I probably couldn't at that stage, which was,
But did you understand it when you were 21? Did you understand what he was saying?
Yeah, I think he was saying I probably wasn't going to stick with it. It probably wouldn't be something that I would like. They probably knew what they were looking for. They would have known what they were looking for, and I probably wasn't it. But that's okay, because I think he, again, did me a favor. I think it's interesting because a lot of these moments in your life, these big decisions you make that affects your life, actually come down to very serendipitous moments that later you go, oh my God, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be, married to this person or in this career or have moved to this country. And I have a lot of those moments that I could bring it back to. But one of those things was going to University of Queensland. I signed up for a student organisation, which was called ISEC. And I met a lot of my adult friends who I'm very close to today through ISEC. But through that association, they sent me on an internship after my degree to Manila, to the Philippines, where I worked in 3M
So from Australia to Manila.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was there for 8-9 months.
First time in Asia, or you've been in Asia?
I'd visited Asia before, but I don't think,
not for work.
I don't think I'd lived there. Well, it was my first job, right? Really, it was my first real job in an office. And they had one computer in the whole office.
Beautiful.
And it was my boss's computer. He was the head of marketing, but he didn't really know how to use it. So he used to get his assistant to print the emails that used to come to him every day, and then he'd put it on his desk and he'd read it with the pen, and he'd write back notes, and then he'd give it to his assistant, and she would write back on the email, which was hilarious. So at a certain point, they didn't know what to do with the computer anymore, and they gave it to me, and I ended up doing an analysis and a report for them on their distribution channel and their supply chain. But that just shows you, back then, we were faxing messages to my parents backwards and forwards because phoning was so expensive. And so I would go, a week or 2, and they wouldn't hear from me unless I sent them a fax or that sort of thing. So, so I think there's this, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had that job in marketing. Maybe I wouldn't have gone into marketing after that. I met my husband there. I met a couple of my best friends there. So that one decision to go to UQ and to sign up for this club actually triggered a chain. It was the first domino, if you like, in a chain of events.
It's amazing. So it's all about keeping your doors open and your options open.
Yeah, and saying yes to things, even when it sounds a bit scary. I mean, hey, how old would I have been? I was 21. I left for Manila to live in a house. I lived in a house with 8 other girls. I shared a room with 2 other girls, Filipino ladies who were working in the city. And we had a shower and a cold shower every day. It was only cold showers. We had no hot water and that sort of thing. But not being afraid of something different and to try something different. And I've always had this bit of this mantra in my own head, which is, just say yes, because you can always go back, but you don't always get the opportunity to go forward.
Exactly.
And that's, you can always go back, Claire. If this doesn't work out, you can always go back and do something.
So how long did you stay in Manila for?
9 months.
9 months.
Then I came back, finished a Masters of International Management at Bond University. But I had met my future husband there. So I thought, maybe I should give this a chance. So I decided to move to do the last year.
So Manila brought you opportunities and lottery, or
Yeah. I thought, maybe I should go and give this a chance and study in Europe for a bit and see if this pans out. So I went and finished my last year of my degree living in Amsterdam and going to the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. So I ended up finally graduating my MBA with Dutch language as one of my electives. And at that time I thought, I'm going to have to go to England to get a job. Who's going to hire someone who's got basic Dutch and not much else, But funnily enough, P&G would. So an American company based in Rotterdam. They were in Unilever's home market. And they didn't mind the fact that my Dutch wasn't that great. They still put me in a brand management role. They had a couple of people from other countries living there, working there. And that's a place where I learned a lot of analysis. It was an amazing trading ground. I think they spent about $150,000 in every new recruit that came in on just training them. And I had some great coaches and bosses there who really helped me develop.
So all of these jobs that you, obviously the first one in Manila, you had the recommendation, someone recommended you and you got the job.
That was through the ISEC internship.
Okay. What about did you apply like everyone else, or was it someone who has been a sponsor for you in the background?
I think a bit of a mix. P&G was interesting. That one I had applied to just join a 2-week course that they were doing for university students. And they called me up and said, look, how's your Dutch? And I said, not great. And they said, well, this is entirely in Dutch, so it's probably not suitable for you, but why don't you apply for a job anyway? And I thought, sure, I'll throw my hat in the ring, but didn't really think I'd get very far. But they ended up actually taking me on. So I was there for 3.5 years. One of the jobs I got a traditional way was Fairfax. So I left. I should tell you first, I left P&G because, as I mentioned to you, when the internet started to become a thing, and we're talking .com 1.0 now, they refer to it in 99, 2000. The first version of it, which wasn't very real, but it was there. They sort of gave it to the IT help desk guy, who was the guy that was managing the ICT, the phones and the computers and stuff.
The printers, computers,
So they didn't really, I don't think, really understood how transformative it was going to be to media, to marketing, to brands in the early days. And so that was kind of a tipping point where I said, I got to get out of here, because the way P&G worked back then was, if we had tested radio ads 50 years ago and it didn't work, no one was really allowed to touch it anymore. So this new thing had come and no one was really testing it or trying to really embrace it and understand it, or it took them a long time to do that. They finally caught up and then they accelerated massively with it. And today it's a totally different company and direct business models, all sorts of things. But I realized I had to get out and go and do this. And so I went and worked for one of Australia's first website application service providers at that time. And
excellent.
That was my transition into tech.
Fantastic. So I can see that you have been transitioning from one vertical to another and so on, and you're really happy, and just you took whatever chances that you did that was offered to you. Did you live through the 9/11 phase and totally. the crash that hit the world?
Yeah.
What do you remember about this phase?
I remember standing in my living room, which was tiny, in my tiny apartment in Rushcutters Bay. I think I was working at Fairfax Digital at the time, which later became called the F2 Network, and now belongs at 9. So there you go. That's how technology disrupted newspapers.
Exactly.
Another example. But yeah, I was standing in my living room and just watching the flames burning on the Twin Towers at that time. And I don't think we realized how transformative that world event would be to everything about how we move and travel and regulations and security and all that sort of stuff that would change thereafter. But yeah, obviously a massive event and a sad event, and still lots of geopolitical events on today that
100%.
yeah.
So when you did describe your gaining different positions and transferring from one organization to another, you made it sound like it is really easy. Was it really easy for you? And what did it really help you?
Yeah,
Because I'm sure like you would go through a lot of hassles of applying interviews and you'd be fighting for positions. From the way you described it, it was like it was really easy for you.
No, I wouldn't say it was easy. It was certainly competitive in the early years. I think what's interesting about going into a new area, so an area that is under disruption, or let's call it the first generation of an area. So in my case, I went from traditional marketing and media and brand building and FMCG into technology, because there was no one with a track record in this space in Australia. So they were just trying to find people who, you know, had a certain level of education and intellect, had a certain experience, who were demonstrating other skills. They couldn't pick up someone from another company and put them in like they can today, who have deep and broad skills in that particular role. And that's what's interesting about going into new fields, is because if you come with a certain set of broad skills into a field, so they valued my traditional marketing and media skills that I'd learned at P&G, and couple that in a new industry, I mean, that's a way to get into an industry. So right now, for instance, if you have a certain set of skills that are valuable to a particular industry vertical that's going to be or is under disruption from AI, now's the time to move, because they don't have people with a track record in that space. This is your best chance to get in and learn it.
The fact that you are a woman, did it help you just getting positioned through different organizations?
I think in the early stages of my career, I didn't notice a difference. And I wouldn't say it had helped me. I don't know if it hindered me, but I wouldn't say it helped me. I think a lot of it was merit, honestly. Where I think it came into play, the gender difference came into play, was when I ran my own business. So I started a business in the tech space, was a technology platform for retailers and shopping centers to take advantage of the location-based aspect of mobile smartphones. So as smartphones started to rise from 60% penetration, 80% penetration to 100% penetration, we realized this was going to, again, totally disrupt a new sector this time, not media, not marketing, not newspapers, not TV, but retail. So together with a friend and colleague from Fairfax, Michael, we started a business that helped shopping centres and their retailers connect with shoppers when they were within a 150, 200 metre radius around the mall. And we did that through mobile applications on smartphone devices.
So how did it impact you being a woman in this field?
Yeah, so what I found, that business we set that up in Singapore, and at that time Singapore was like amazing. Like it was so focused on becoming the next Silicon Valley or the next Israel. They had amazing programs to start a business, so we decided to. And as we grew that business, I started to realize that there was, I would say, a level of unconscious bias in certain people that we would talk to. And so Michael and I would strategize, like, is it clear that this particular investor clearly is like having a lot of affinity and a lot of eye contact with Michael, who was a man?
Unbelievable.
And so we would let Michael lead that conversation, whereas this particular investor or this particular customer has more affinity with me. And so it was we did notice it. There were some markets where...
So what was the proportion, really? Did they focus on Michael more than you?
You got to
Or?
remember, I was working in retail, which was predominantly in retail in Asia. There's a lot of women, and a lot of women running and owning large retail groups and shopping centers in Asia. And I would say that in some markets in Asia, it's less gender divided than here. You know, like. You really do have families or intergenerational.
Than here,
wealth
you mean in Australia?
Yeah, that really own.
Despite all the claim that we've claimed, we don't have any gender discrimination in Australia.
There's markets in like Singapore and Malaysia. To some extent, the Philippines are probably have a less of a gap, certainly in the professional realm. I would say than Australia. And yeah, and there's a number of reasons for that. Societal way society is structured, where if you give birth, there's people that help you with your children. And so those things help to keep you in a career, in a job. But yeah, back to the thing, we did notice that there was unconscious bias often in discussions, particularly with investors. And therefore we would say, well, we would talk about who should lead the discussion based on that.
Claire, I'm really interested in your view on different markets.
Yeah.
So obviously you worked in Australia, worked in Asia. You did work in Europe.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the States. Did you ever work in the States?
No, I've never worked. I've never been based in the States.
Okay, so hopefully the next move will be to the States.
Yeah.
Did you find, what was the common factor between all of these industries?
Yeah.
And what differentiated Australia from Asia, from Europe, from your perspective?
Yeah.
From someone who has done it, who has experienced it.
The common factor, okay, as in leading a business or 100%. Running a business, etc. I think people is a universal challenge for everybody. So no matter where you go, and particularly at this time, the challenge is finding the right people for the right roles and to get them to do the right things. And we talk about this a lot at Scaling Up. And if you ask 10 business owners today, founders, CEOs, leadership teams, what's your biggest challenge? They will pretty much all tell you finding the right people is the biggest challenge. People are different because of different geographies and different cultures. People are very different. So, for example, in Holland, people are very direct. They're very candid, almost to the point that you think they're being incredibly rude. I want to have a hamburger. That's the direct translation from Dutch. But at the same time,
does it mean they know what they want, or they're fixed in the way they present themselves?
I think in Holland, and sometimes, my experience was that the debate was almost as important as the outcome. That everybody has a say, that you get to talk it out and thrash it out. That's a really important thing in Holland. Whereas in Australia, people kind of more want to be
reserved and
amenable and liked, and I'm your mate and I don't want you to think badly about me. And so it seems to be more of that. Germany was very interesting. Germany is and will always be a land of engineers. So in an engineering world, in order to get to a perfect outcome, so you want to build something like a car or a piece of software or whatever it is, you have to go through a set of steps or the process to get there. And if you skip the step, or if you do the step not to the level of quality that they like, they think the outcome will not be achieved. And so you have to go through these steps. And so it's very interesting to have a head of engineering from Germany and, a CEO from the US in the same room, because
100%. They're two different schools.
One's like, how do we get 100%. To this end goal? And the German guys go, well, no, first we have to go through 100%. This step, and there's no way I can tell you when it's going to be ready, So, so that's kind of really very.
They're two different schools. The American school is completely from the European one.
Yeah, I think what Australia suffers from, and this comes to importance when we start talking about scaling, is that there is a physical and to some extent mental barrier. We suffer from smallness, right? We're a small country on a very big land surface area, but we're ultimately a small country in terms of population, GDP, world political influence, all that sort of stuff. And so when you have a business that starts here, unless it's a business that's what we call born global, a software business that can be, basically picked up from anywhere in the world, like an Atlassian, Jira, or Confluence kind of situation. It's actually mentally, there's a lot of mental and physical barriers to overcome in order to scale your business internationally. And so if we look at countries like the US, though, there's enough population to scale within the US before you even consider going to Europe or going to Asia. In Europe, it's not as easy as the US because of language and cultural and regulation barriers, but you can still drive across the border from Germany to France and go visit some customers to test whether or not you think there's going to be some demand. And that's a relatively low cost, easy thing to do.
So where do you see Australia in the map, really? In the map of technology, innovation and creation?
I think so.
Do we have any position at all?
I think Australia's pretty good at starting stuff, honestly. So from an innovation perspective, we have a lot of startups. We do relatively well at R&D. We've got a great R&D program, grants program. There's some criticism of it, but overall it's pretty good. Most business owners will tell you they're pretty happy with it.
So do you think the government is doing enough in this field?
But the challenge and the big gap is between startup and scale up. And that's not just Australia. I'll come back to Australia, but globally, the thing that I learned from starting my business and scaling it and then eventually exiting through direct sale was that while starting a business is hard, actually scaling a business is infinitely harder. And by the way, it happens less often than anyone will have you believe. Yeah. So I started researching this together with my friends over at the University of Mannheim, and we discovered that it's less than 3% of businesses actually ever make it beyond 5 million euro in sales and keep growing, which is not a lot, right? If you think about 5 million euro, I mean, it's a lot, but it's not a lot. And most businesses bumble along at 1 or 2 if they're still in business after 5 years. And then even those businesses that grow quite high, they might grow 10, 20% year on year. They get to a certain point and they just kind of stop growing. They're around year 7, year 8, year 9, and it suddenly just starts to flatline. This is in general. These are kind of the stats. Now, in the US, it's a little bit higher. It's closer to that 3%. In some countries, it's a little bit lower. It's closer to the 1.5%. And I don't have firm facts on Australia, but I'd beg to differ that in Australia, it's probably closer to the 1.5% that actually get to scale because of some of these physical and mental barriers, the fact that we suffer from this smallness, but also the fact that the government policies don't really focus on the scaling part. They focus on growing lots of little 1 to 5 person companies and then the big end of town and spurring innovation.
And they just forget about what's in between.
The gap in the middle is there. So there's 2 ways you address it.
So let me ask you the same question again. Yeah. Do you think the Australian government is doing enough to help businesses in Australia?
I think government policies could be doing more, could be working harder in our favor to get more companies that are already there, already have investment, already on the path, but having an increased likelihood of success and increased accelerating success with scaling. And they should invest in that because why? Scale-ups are actually the most productive, most efficient, the biggest employers or the biggest creators of new jobs. They don't come from well-established businesses. Those are letting people go. They don't come from 1 to 5 person startups. They come from the scale-ups. New jobs come from the scale-ups. And so everyone has an interest, not just the people who own those companies or the people who work in those companies, but everyone has an interest. If you want to grow your country, you want to grow the GDP, you want to grow productivity, you want to grow innovation, you should be investing at the scale-up stage. Yes, we need a pipeline of startups, but wouldn't it be great if we could double the percentage of those startups that were actually successful from 1.5% to 3% or from 3% to 6%? Wouldn't that be great for the country from a growth perspective and a new job perspective? So I'm a big champion of we need to invest in helping more startups transition to scale and in making policies and removing constraints to help Australian companies scale both domestically and internationally. the UK has got a policy organisation. It's actually privately run. It's called the Scale Up Institute. And every year they do research and they work with government on policies to actually improve the situation for hiring the best talent, for making sure that the funding is available to Australian scale-ups. A lot of the funding capacity in Australia is either for the very early stage, or once you get really, really big and you start to go to, bank and PE funds and infrastructure funds. But that middle ground, particularly for non-software, is it's very, very small in Australia.
Do you think there's a lack of awareness with the Australian politics or politicians just to be aware of the scale up as a scale up itself and the importance that it does to the economy in Australia, or they know what's going on and they ignore it? What's your view
I honestly
on that?
couldn't comment on it. I would say that in New South Wales, there is a level of awareness inside the government that they need to do more at the scaling stage. They've done a relatively good job at the starting stage. I mean, there's certainly areas for improvement around real innovation out of universities and that material science type innovation. But I think there is a small group of people inside the industry parts of government that understand that more can be done on the scaling stage. And if we focused and doubled down on that for the next 10 years, I think we'd be in a much better position. But it's going to take a decade. And that's part of the challenge we face in Australia is the changing political parties every 4 or 8 years. You can't have longevity. Whereas you look at Singapore, where the prime minister's been in there for how long. And they really play an intergenerational game there. They make a 25-year plan about innovation, and our company was a beneficiary of that. So
it's so funny. The second guest who mentioned this, Ezio, was one of our guests on the podcast.
Yeah.
And he told me, I think the Western world need dictatorship, and he was really fixed on his thoughts and in his mind that it does provide some level of stability.
Yeah.
In the long term, and how political changes are always disruptive to everything in the economy within every single country. I'm really interested in the startup phase, where your first startup.
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm starting up now. I did do a lot of startups before, and some did succeed, some didn't.
Okay.
But I'm really interested in your point of view on startups.
Yeah.
How did Claire start up her own business now? And it's been running for, I'm not sure, many years.
Well, that business I sold, or we exited that business. But I can explain to you that journey, if you like, and why we exited. That's probably the most important aspect.
Well, I think just telling the viewers and telling the new generation who are starting up their businesses now, they would learn something of you. About your experience. What was your ins and outs?
So I think the things, it's a long story, but ultimately I started this business with a friend, so it wasn't just me. There was someone else involved, so we were working on it together.
Do you have to start with a friend, or you can start on your own?
No, there are people who are solo founders. I think the benefits of starting with someone else is just diverse thinking, complementary skills, someone to bounce ideas off in the early stage, co-investment, because if you're bootstrapping the first few years, you can both put in money.
And two brains is better than one.
And of course, emotional support, all that sort of stuff. But we started it. I was mainly the product lead. He was more the commercial, financial, governance, legal kind of side of things. None of us had tech skills, so we ended up having to outsource that in the early days and then hire for that. That was our first senior hire. We got really lucky with the hire. He was awesome, Georgie. Worked like a founder, really level-headed, really complimentary to us.
Mm-hmm.
But that was luck. That wasn't... wasn't very designed. I wish I could say we designed it that way. But what I learned in the starting phase, what I learned through that whole experience was, in the early years, we were a first mover. We were the first to come out with this technology in the region, which was location-based commerce. we made a lot of mistakes, a lot of stuff around IP and things like that got us, ended up costing a lot of money. But ultimately, we got to a level of product market fit pretty early because we both had experience in disruptive technologies and how quickly they can disrupt an industry. So we spotted it after seeing it in media and marketing, TV, newspapers. We spotted what was going to happen to retail. And so
did you spot it, or you found a niche and you focus on this niche?
Not yet. So
okay.
we first spotted this change in technology, and we knew it was going to affect retail. And then we saw some stuff happening overseas with Groupon and Jump On It and those kinds of brands. And we thought, in Asia, this is going to be on mobile. It's not going to be on desktop. And everywhere else, it was kind of PC-led. So we said, let's do this on mobile. And that's how it started. It started that way. And I sort of literally white papered the whole customer experience because I had a background in FMCG. I'd had some experience with retail. I had a lot of experience with marketing. So I understood that time and place matters to marketing. So if you create something where someone's receiving an offer within a certain proximity of a store, the hypothesis is the response rate will be higher than if they're sitting at home on the couch
100%.
watching TV late at night, right? So that was the theory. And we demonstrated that theory worked by building a prototype and partnering with a shopping centre. Our first shopping centre was 313 in Lendlease, a Lendlease iconic shopping centre in Singapore. And we really worked in partnership with them, but we kind of said, this is what you're responsible for, this is what we're responsible for, everybody clear, here's the plan. It was a really structured partnership.
So in your startup, you found the idea, you did a prototype.
Yeah.
You did a presentation to...
Well, first I talked to a lot of people, which I think is really important because you talk to a lot of people, they'll help you solve some of the problems and how you're going to do certain things. You haven't thought through it yet. And I did talk to a lot of people first. I know there's a lot of people who won't talk to people because they're worried that they're going to steal the idea. But what I learned is that there's so many ideas in the world. It's not really about the idea. It's about the execution.
So what was the reaction of other people? Because normally when you talk to people about new ideas, they'll always push you back or just give you the risk and, they will act more negative than positive.
But that's great.
Okay.
Because that's the opportunity to think through, how do I solve for that problem? That's actually the people you want to talk to. You don't want to surround yourself always with the people who are just going to tell you you're onto something and this is great and isn't that fantastic, and go, they're not going to help you in the early days. I mean, it's nice that they're being supportive, and you do need that. There is a place for having...
But do you need negativity, or you need someone who just motivates you? So, Claire, you're doing...
I think
this is great.
You need the naysayers because the naysayers help you see where the holes are. And if you don't get to close the holes, you won't get it. It's like the guy who invented the bridge climb in Australia. And he had a list of over 100 reasons why the government told him he couldn't get people up on top of that bridge. And he just used that list and knocked down every single one of them until they gave him the license to do it. And that's the advantage of talking to a lot of people, particularly ones that poke holes in what you're doing. Now, there comes a time where you after you've been in the business for a while, you know more about it than anybody else. Of course, it's your business, it's your customers, it's your team. And so while it's helpful to have mentors and advisors, no one knows the business as well as you. And that's when you start to shift the type of people that you want to be spending your time with and who's going to be helpful and worthwhile. So two things happen between startup and scale up. In the beginning, when you're running a business, you're starting a business, it's usually you and the other founders or maybe some early hires, but mainly it's the founders making the decisions. They're responsible for the decisions. As one of my friends said, there's less decisions and you make more of them. There's a very, very, a friend who's a very successful founder. And that's what he said. And I love that saying, because then when you get to scale up stage, actually, you have to hire more people. They have to be making decisions. You can't be across everything. And so it becomes about the leadership team and not about the founders. And that transition from being a founder to a CEO of leadership team people you hire, hopefully, who are better at specific verticals than you are, specific functions than you are.
I've got two questions on that.
Yeah.
One is, was it easy for you just to pick up the phone and speak to the shopping center and say, oh, look, I have this brilliant idea. I'm just going to come and present to you. So that was one.
Yeah.
And two, as a founder, again, is it easy to let go and say, I better step back now and let someone just go and scale my business up?
I'm going to answer number two first. That's the hardest thing. The letting go thing is the hardest thing. I got to tell you. Yeah. And there's steps that need to be put in place in order for the founder to feel comfortable to let go. And I've done a lot of research on what those are, and I've lived it myself. And that's part of the reason I became a scaling up coach, because the process of scaling up, the structured approach of scaling up, that's one of the outcomes. It helps you from going from founder to going to CEO with a leadership team, with a structured approach. But so, yes, it's hard. Most founders will tell you it's hard to let go. It's a process. The first question?
The first question was calling the shopping centers and say, look, I've got this new brilliant idea. Are you willing to listen to me?
So I was in marketing. I had a background in marketing. I wasn't in sales. But when you're a founder of a company, you have to learn how to sell. And I would say my sales skills today are probably average. I got to say, I'm not the born salesperson, but I had my own approach. And I think it's easy when what you've got is new and exciting and they want to learn about it and it's different. Where that gets harder, you can get in if you've got something innovative and new. And that might last, you might be able to run with that for 18 months to 2 years, right? Yeah. But guess what? Technology is always evolving. It's dynamic. People are going to catch up with you unless you've got something amazingly new, like totally new to world innovation, and you've just locked that thing down with a patent. People are going to follow you there. And that's what happened to us. And so what starts to happen after the first year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, particularly in software, is the lines of difference, your point of difference starts to get fuzzy. It starts to get gray. And this is the time when most companies need to go back and do a strategy reset, because they mistake a point of product difference, like a different product, for a different strategy. And actually you need a different growth strategy. You don't necessarily need to have a different product feature or a different product benefit or a new module. And what ends up happening is a lot of companies end up doubling down on their product innovation when they should be stepping back and going, no, we need to have differentiation, but we need to have that across our strategy. And that's the bit where I come in normally as a scaling up coach, is to help people get.
Okay, so during the startup phase, because I'd love to talk about startup so much, did you believe in your product? Did you really believe in your product and say, look, I think this product is going to make a killing for everyone, and you start promoting this product? Or you could just be hesitant in between, it might work or it may not work. Do you have to believe in your product and then promote it?
I think it's more the initial phase before you have the product is a kind of a hypothesis or a hunch. I have a hunch that if I can reach people when they're in walking distance to a store or a shopping center, that they are more likely going to respond and buy. That was the hunch. And then we tested that. My co-founder and I, we built a prototype. We brought on some interns. We got some people involved in the business and we tested that. And the hunch was proved right. The rates were unbelievable, like 10 times higher than doing any kind of online advertising or, leaflet drops or anything else that shopping centers and retailers were doing in those days. And so once you get that initial proof point, you're like, wow, this really works. Okay, can we replicate it with someone else? And so you start, and so the more you get replication and proof points, and then maybe it doesn't work over here, but it's working better over here, you start to get more and more confident in your ability. But what inevitably happens, and this particularly happens to, I would say, tech-driven businesses or businesses where the business model is built on technology, particularly software technology, is that if you're in a market that's at all interesting and you're having any success, people will follow you there. And that's when the line starts to get blurry. The point of difference starts to get blurry. And if that point of difference starting to get blurry, just doubling down on product development is not necessarily going to get you out of it. So that's the point where you need to do a reset and really relook at your strategy. Yeah.
Look, the recent startup that I've done, I had a lot of advices and I watched a lot of videos and information, and they all said one thing: look at other people, just to some extent copy what they're doing. If they succeed, if they're successful, you don't have to go and create something else. You just copy whatever they're doing, modify it a bit, and just follow the trend. Does it make you successful if you just copy modification? And
I think it depends with what you're copying. Okay, so if it's about methods and approaches of doing things, process, you can learn from others. Sure, that's a good way of approaching it. If it's about innovation, then there's different types of innovation, but somewhere you have to be different. There's no point just copying someone else, coming after them and replicating it and not being different in some form. If there's no difference, the only way that your customer is going to differentiate you is on cost.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the race to the bottom. So we don't want that, right? Or if it is on cost, you have an amazing cost advantage that the other guys don't have. So there is an element of what I would say best practice sharing. For example, what's the best practice of doing a podcast? What's the method of the best practice? But you want to point a difference on your podcast, right? Otherwise, you're just competing with the next guy who's doing a podcast. So
100%.
You don't want that. So product innovation has been strongly influential in success, in growth and success. But product innovation alone will not help you scale. At a certain point, you need to invest in other things. You need to take risk. You need to get funding. You need to invest in process innovation. You need to be very conscious of your unit economics and your economies of scale. Otherwise, you're going to grow and grow broke and manage cash flow. So there's a lot of things to consider on your journey, and they will come into play at different points in your journey. And so it's sort of understanding where are you on this growth journey between startup and massively scaled, and what do I need to do next? And that's where I think as a founder or CEO, it's good to turn outward, turn to people who've done it before, turn to people who can truly advise you, or turn to coaches as well. They can help you with, and the leadership team. But it's a game of constantly learning. And there is a huge correlation between founders who read a lot, learn a lot, have strong learning agility, learning mindset, and success.
So if I come to you and say, Claire, what are your tips for scaling up?
Yeah.
Do you open a book and say, look, Roland, you have to follow this, and that, and your business will scale up? Or how does it work?
Well, firstly, I'll try and work out what stage you're at. So, how many people do you have in the business? What's where are you at with your customers? What's your revenue like? What does your gross margin look like? What's your ambition? Ambition plays a very big role in scaling, because if you have the ambition that you just want to be the biggest podcast in Sydney, that's different to someone who wants to be the biggest technology podcast in the world, right? Maybe that's not your ambition. Maybe it's something else, some impact goal that you have. So first, it's really about, I try to understand the size and shape of the business today and the ambition. And then I try to understand, at Scaling Up, we divide it into 4 learning tracks: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And under cash is also unit economics and business model. And then I try to look at where are you strong and where are you weak. And then we try to build out a plan that actually uses a structured approach. And so we use exercises. And the difference between, I would say, mentoring or consulting and coaching is that in consulting, it's like, I don't have the answers. I'm going to you because you're a subject matter expert in strategy or finance or sales, and I'm hoping you're going to tell me effectively what I should be doing. That's not coaching. Coaching is, you know your business, you know your customers, you know your people, you have all the answers. I'm just going to ask you the right questions, and I'm going to give you a structured methodology to follow. so that you can focus and uncover what's the best path now for you to get to scale. Because scaling requires focus and discipline, and that's different to the startup phase. So what tends to happen between starting and scaling is people actually need to get more focused on a niche. So coming back to your niche. So what we did was we went broad. So we said, shopping centers, now let's go get retailers.
I asked you this question before, and I would love to ask you this question again. What do I do? Like, when do I say I better stop? I don't want to scale my business. I just want to go and start another one.
Okay.
Versus, no, let me just scale this business and see how much more I can generate out of it. Is there any, like, a point when I should ask myself, in which direction should I go?
Yeah. Are you asking at what point should I cut my losses?
100%.
I wish I had a formula for you on that. I mean, I think there's so many people that do. Okay, so what you often hear is the story of persistence, right? Just hanging in there. Often you're the last person standing, right, in a category. So sometimes it's a game of just hanging in there. During COVID, it became a game of just hanging in there while others fell. This is why cash flow is so important in a business, or having access to funding streams, because during tough times, you want to be able to be the one that's standing at the end. Or if you see an opportunity, hey, that business, my nearest competitor is not doing so well, maybe I can acquire them, or I can do a joint venture. So there is a lot to be said for managing a business through one day at a time and just keep going and hanging in there and then getting to the breakthrough. So if that's you, that's great. There is another thing to be said for test and learn. I had a hypothesis. I tested it out. Maybe it's a great business. Maybe it's a great idea, product idea. Maybe there's a bunch of customers that like it, but the financial model behind it is not worthwhile. It's not what you want, or it's not what they value it, but the people who value it can't afford to pay for it, and you can't find another way to run the business model, like through advertising or some other model. So it starts to become a game of, it's not just about this kind of product customer fit, but it's product market fit. And is it an efficient business model? And I think that's the number one thing that we get to too late when starting a business. People too late start validating the value question and understanding, what does it take to scale this business? If I spend $1 over here on YouTube advertising, or if I spend $10,000 over here on YouTube advertising, how does that
YouTube will love you now.
How does that money trickle through so that I'm earning $1 of, or, more than $10,000 in revenue back, right? That's the game. Yeah. And with all my production costs and everything. So if something is not going to give me an ROI, or the business is just too hard to scale, I haven't quite cracked the levers of growth yet, then it's a question of, will you ever be able to, or not?
Yep.
Or can you just keep going and you believe it's crackable, but you just got to test and learn along the way. Yep.
So you as Claire, you have been through so many scale ups and so on, and obviously leaders played a major role.
Yes.
In scaling up.
Yeah, totally.
My question to you is, what is your preferred type of leader?
Yeah.
Who's willing to scale up, who would understand the concept of scaling up and go through the pain and the benefit, hopefully, at the end of the journey?
So that's a really good question, because I don't work with just anyone. It needs to be rewarding for both the coach and the founder or the CEO or the leadership team. And so I like to work with leaders who are firstly ambitious. They actually want to scale up. This is why working with teams of corporates or subsidiaries doesn't work, because sometimes in a corporate world, the ambition is not there in certain divisions of the leadership of things. So that's why working with startups and scale-ups is great, because everybody's interests are all aligned. So firstly, ambition. Are they ambitious? How ambitious are they? Can they see that do they have a vision or a place they want to go? Can they see something? Can they sort of articulate that? That's important. The second thing is, are they humble enough to know they don't know everything? and they're happy. They're avid learners. They want to learn. They're like you, thirsty for knowledge. Tell me, Claire. Like that, you want people who have got that learning agility. They want to learn. They're curious. They know they don't know everything. They're humble enough to know they don't know everything. This, what I would say, is the basic part of good leadership in today's world, which is always changing.
Always changing, especially with new technology.
Yeah.
You have something new every day. There's
Yeah.
a lot of disruptive, I don't know, but what do you call it now? Disruptive technology being thrown to the market now. And it's really reshaping the whole landscape of IT, technology, and even us as humans. So how do we cope with this? How do we scale up? How do we base our strategy in scaling up?
Yeah.
If we have a new thing every day coming and knocking on our door.
Yeah. And that is also massively distracting. I totally hear you there. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where you're chasing something completely new, completely off strategy because it's the hottest thing. A lot of startups make that mistake, particularly if they're funded, so they're not internally funded, but they need to go raise capital or get financing from angels or venture capitalists or whatever. And what they end up doing is reinventing their business based on whatever the big trend is at the moment. So, for example, a friend of mine, she just came back from NRF, National Retail Foundation, and everything that was once data and predictive analytics is now called AI, because everyone's reinventing themselves as AI, because that's where the money is going, AI, climate tech, these kinds of things. So, so there is a risk that you're flipping and flopping a lot. Your own people get whiplash in that process, and no one knows where you're going. No one can articulate it. If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. So I think it's important to have a long-term direction of where you're going that goes beyond your purpose and your core values, but is pretty clear, and you know when you're going to get there. And an example, and sorry, this concept we use in scaling up comes from Jim Collins. It's called the BHAG. You've heard of the BHAG, right?
Yeah.
The big, hairy, audacious goal. It is a destination. It is, we're going to empower X number of people by this date to do Y, or whatever it is. It's a destination. Starbucks BHAG was to become the most recognizable brand in the world, more recognizable than Coke. And so they knew that the brand would drive their economic engine, and it also was, around their purpose and the things they were trying to achieve. So the BHAG is very much a stake in the ground. Once you have the BHAG's like the connecting tissue between the purpose and the vision and the core values and the brand promises you make to your customers and getting stuff done.
Fantastic.
And once you have that BHAG, all this stuff around AI and climate change and whatever the trend is that's kind of trending and hot at the moment, you can make that fit towards how does that help me achieve my BHAG?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Look, Claire, I'm sure you have been watching the market and you've been part of the market for many years now. If I can ask you to just name one or few customers where you said, "Oh my God, these people need scale up. They're in trouble," but they didn't actually adopt any strategy and they have been out of the game now. Can you name anyone who just say, "Oh, I wish they did listen to me," or "I wish they did listen to anyone who talked to them about scaling up"? Where would they be now?
Well, look, I can't pinpoint a particular. I can tell you some of the companies in Australia
Or even
that have
industries.
used scaling up. So in the technology space, Atlassian used scaling up when they were only 50 people, and that was when they were setting their core values, for example. So that through the scaling up process, they set the core values, which they still have today, by the way, which is still on their website, which they still hire against. One of Australia's most valuable tech companies based in Queensland is called Octopus Deploy, and they have scaling up coach, one of my fellow coaches, friends, Anna Semios, and they're doing a great job using scaling up internally to help with their meeting rhythms and their disciplines that they need in their organization. The founder himself said, "I'm going to put my hand up. I'm not the most disciplined person here, but we brought in scaling up to help us to get to that next level." So there are companies, there's a lot of examples. The Red Group in Australia is a very well-known example there. They used it as well. So there's a lot of examples of people who've used it and succeeded. There's a lot of examples of people who haven't used it and succeeded. But I guarantee you, when you look under the hood and you ask the founder, who helped you? Who did you turn to when you needed to, when the moment was right? Who did you turn outward to? They'll say either other operators or experts or coaches. Someone has helped them. Nearly every successful founder, CEO, and leadership team has got someone there helping them, a coach or someone. So that is truth. I do often see companies, particularly in the venture space in tech, where they come too late because scaling begins early. Planning for scale begins early. And if you don't plan, especially business model efficiency and all that sort of stuff, and they come too late, and they should come earlier. And then otherwise we have to unwind leadership teams and all sorts of things. So 100%. Start early would be my advice.
Look, talking to you, Claire, time flies. I haven't noticed that we've been talking for more than an hour now. There's a lot of topics. There's a lot of discussions. I would love to have you again on this podcast down the track, because I'm sure that our discussions will never end. Yeah, thank you so much for everything. Yeah, thank you, and hopefully next time we'll bring something more specific. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Oh, it was great. It was actually very relaxed and casual. And I realized that my relationship with technology actually started very early in my life. I hadn't connected those dots before. So thank you for that. We covered a lot of topics, a lot of different diverse topics. So that was pretty interesting. And I think I feel that you made me feel very comfortable, and it was pretty easy to talk to you. So thank you very much for that.
It's my pleasure.